He wasn't on any roster, and he wasn't supposed to be there. He was armed. The question is, who was he really? Why was Joshua Runkles at State Farm Stadium in Arizona the night before tens of thousands would gather for Charlie Kirk's memorial? Who sent him, and for what purpose? Was this coincidence, impersonation, or something far more sinister? Was he there as a self-appointed protector, a looming threat, or a man driven by political motive? Here's what we know. He carried law enforcement credentials, but they were inactive, expired. He had weapons, multiple knives, a loaded pistol, and a revolver. He was caught and arrested before the secure perimeter was even fully established. But his motive, his orders, his true affiliation, those remain a mystery. And that's where this story begins. If you're drawn into questions like this, make sure you hit like, tap subscribe, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Let's see just how far this question spreads. Who sent him? September 20th, 2025, Glendale, Arizona, State Farm Stadium. The day before a memorial that was expected to draw nearly 100,000 people. Supporters, mourners, and high-profile speakers, including former President Donald Trump and Vice Presidential nominee J.D. Vance. Security was already intense. The Secret Service, local Glendale police, and the Arizona Department of Public Safety were working in lockstep, tightening every perimeter. Every movement was under watch. And yet one man slipped through. Joshua Runkles, 42 years old, a resident of North Carolina. He approached the venue, carrying himself as if he belonged there. His claim? He was law enforcement. Not only that, he said he was part of the security detail for Turning Point USA. On the surface, it sounded official, almost believable. He even carried credentials. But later, investigators would confirm the truth. Those credentials were inactive, expired. At first, he was stopped outside the stadium. Security staff noticed the weapons, told him he couldn't enter armed, told him to contact Turning Point USA directly. For a moment, it seemed like compliance. He left. The situation looked diffused. But less than 2 hours later, he was back. This time, inside the stadium itself. And this time, discovered not by local staff, but by the Secret Service. He was still armed, still carrying knives, still carrying guns. That was the moment the situation shifted from suspicious to urgent. Within seconds, he was detained. The questions, however, were only beginning. The arrest was swift. The charges followed just as quickly. Joshua Runkles was booked on felony impersonation of a law enforcement officer, along with a misdemeanor weapons violation, carrying deadly weapons in a prohibited space. On paper, the charges were serious, but when bond was set, it raised eyebrows. Just $500 secured. He was declared indigent. A court would appoint him legal counsel. But while the court treated him as just another case file, the public saw something else entirely. This wasn't any ordinary event. Just 10 days earlier, Charlie Kirk had been assassinated. His death had already polarized the nation, drawing both grief and outrage. Now, in the shadow of that killing, with a memorial drawing one of the largest political crowds in recent history, an armed man impersonating law enforcement was caught inside the venue. The headlines wrote themselves. Was this another attempt at disruption? A political threat? A copycat? Or something more tangled, more hidden? Almost overnight, the story went national, and the questions grew louder. The deeper investigators looked, the stranger the picture became. First, the physical evidence. On him, they found weapons, a loaded pistol, a revolver, and several knives, tools of intimidation or preparation, enough to raise alarms in any context. But inside a stadium set to host nearly 100,000 people, it was a red flag waving in broad daylight. Then, the credentials. Yes, he carried law enforcement identification, but when checked, the truth surfaced. Those credentials were inactive, expired. They carried the appearance of authority, but not the reality. He was not on any roster. He was not authorized by any agency. And yet, he tried to use those credentials to step past the perimeter of trust. Then came the symbolic weight of his actions. To impersonate law enforcement is not just a crime. It's a performance, a way of stepping into authority, gaining access, commanding trust. Why choose the day before one of the most politically charged memorials in recent memory? Why return after being turned away once already? And why act in ways that seasoned officers described as suspicious? Coincidence, or something closer to intent? Finally, the digital and documentary trail. Thus far, no leaked texts, no manifestos, no online posts to explain his mindset, no GPS or tracker data released to the public. What remains are his words to officers, the credentials he flashed, and the fact that he claimed he was part of Turning Point USA's own security detail. That claim alone is now evidence, one that prosecutors will weigh carefully against the physical proof. Together, these layers form a strange mosaic: weapons, expired credentials, suspicious behavior, and a false claim of authority. Enough for charges, yes, but not yet enough to explain why. And in a case like this, why matters most? Step back and the evidence begins to tell a story. The charges against Joshua Runkles hinge on 3 simple facts. He claimed to be law enforcement, he carried weapons where they were forbidden, and he had no authority to be there. That alone forms the skeleton of a prosecution case. The physical evidence, his pistol, revolver, and knives, paired with his expired credentials, creates the first layer. His own statements to officers, insisting he was part of the security team, add another. Together, these are the building blocks of felony impersonation. But the setting makes everything heavier. This wasn't a random sidewalk or a quiet neighborhood. This was State Farm Stadium, in the tense days following Charlie Kirk's assassination. A memorial where 100,000 people were expected, guarded by the Secret Service, watched by the nation. In that context, every step Runkles took looked more deliberate, more calculated. For prosecutors, that setting transforms a crime into something more than just possession or false identity. It raises the stakes, it suggests intent. It forces the jury or the public to ask, was this man testing the system, or was he preparing for something worse? And that is exactly the narrative the state will build in court. So who is Joshua Runkles? At 42 years old, his residence is listed in North Carolina. Reports suggest he once wore a badge himself. Some outlets point to service as a deputy sheriff, possibly in Idaho, though official records remain unconfirmed. If true, it would mean he knew the protocols, the chain of command, and the hard lines between real authority and impersonation. Publicly, no criminal history trails behind him, no list of past arrests, no court dockets filled with red flags. On paper, until this moment, he looked like any other citizen. And yet here he was, armed, impersonating, inserting himself into one of the most heavily secured events in the country. That's the contradiction. A man who, if he truly came from law enforcement, would know exactly where the line is drawn, and yet he crossed it. Someone told he could not carry weapons inside, yet he came back anyway. Someone told he was not part of the team, yet he insisted he was. Suspicious behavior doesn't always prove intent, but it always signals risk. So why? Was it a hunger for authority? A need to be seen as part of something larger? Or was it sympathy with the cause, a political movement mourning its leader, where slipping in as security could feel like belonging? Or perhaps it was something deeper. Identity, mental health. A need to wear the uniform of authority even after the badge itself was gone. Whatever the explanation, one fact is clear. The ordinary life on paper and the actions on the ground don't align. And in that contradiction lies the danger. No case unfolds in isolation. It relies on the eyes that saw, the hands that intervened, and the institutions that decide what becomes evidence. First, the chain of law enforcement. Local Glendale police, the Secret Service, and the Arizona Department of Public Safety all played their part. They observed Joshua Runkles, detained him, collected his weapons, and verified his credentials. That collaboration ensures the evidence holds up in court, and that every step, from the first stop to the final arrest, is documented. Then, there's Turning Point USA, the very organization hosting the memorial. Their security team was the first to confront him. They told him he could not enter armed. They told him he wasn't cleared as security. For them, it wasn't about politics. It was about protecting thousands of people. They may now stand as key witnesses in court, their testimony shaping how the public understands his intent. But the cooperation raises questions of its own. Law enforcement acted out of duty, public safety, and legal obligation. Turning Point staff acted out of responsibility, ensuring order and trust for a grieving crowd. Both were credible, both clear in their motives. Still, a shadow lingers. Impersonation of law enforcement is not a victimless crime. It undermines trust. It creates risk. But does this case reflect malice or confusion? Was Joshua Runkles a man plotting disruption, or a man in mental decline, clinging to authority he no longer had? And here lies the ethical tightrope. Should the media assume the worst, framing him as a would-be attacker? Or is there a danger in sensationalizing a man who may have been unwell, misguided, or even manipulated? Justice demands accountability, but fairness demands restraint. And in cases like this, the line between the two is razor thin. Every case turns on motive. And in this one, motive remains a cloud. One possibility: recognition. A man inserting himself into the inner circle, wanting to stand shoulder to shoulder with real law enforcement. To feel the authority again, to hold the power that once may have been his. Another, disruption. Perhaps to cause alarm, to fracture trust, or to make a statement in front of one of the most politically charged gatherings in the nation. And then the darker possibility, intent to act. To gain access with weapons inside a memorial attended by leaders, supporters, and mourners. So far, no evidence points to a violent plan beyond possession. But possession alone, inside a stadium, cannot be ignored. What remains unproven are the questions that cut deepest. Was Joshua Runkles sent, or was he alone? If sent, by whom? If alone, what drove him? Was he motivated by ideology, by loyalty, by delusion? No manifesto has surfaced. No online postings have tied him to extremist movements. No affiliations have been confirmed. The silence of his digital trail only makes the mystery louder. And so, the case turns to us, to the questions that demand reflection. If someone claims authority without lawful credentials, where do we draw the line between harmless deception and dangerous threat? In a time of polarization, when grief and rage sit side by side, do we assume motive, or do we risk underestimating confusion, delusion, even derangement? And perhaps most haunting of all, if Joshua Runkles had not been caught, if he had slipped through unnoticed, what might have happened once the lights went up and the memorial began? The news of Joshua Runkles' arrest sent ripples far beyond State Farm Stadium. Communities were shaken. Coming just 10 days after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, the nation was already on edge. Fear, grief, and anger blended into a tense atmosphere. Headlines framed the arrest as a threat not just to safety, but to political speech itself, fueling debates about celebrity activist martyrdom and partisan tension. Social media amplified every angle. Some demanded swift and strict penalties, insisting that any impersonation of law enforcement is a line that cannot be crossed. Others urged caution, warning against overreaction, and questioning whether the man's actions were born of malice or confusion. Amid the online storm, larger questions emerged. How are credentials verified at political events? How do authorities detect potential threats before tragedy strikes? And beyond procedure, what does this incident reveal about society itself? Impersonation laws exist to protect trust, but they also expose vulnerabilities. Political gatherings, weapon access, ideological fervor, all collide in moments like this. Grief, martyr narratives, and societal polarization can push individuals toward dramatic, even dangerous actions. This case, small in one sense, but monumental in context, has become a mirror, reflecting not just one man's choices, but the fragile balance between authority, security, and the passions of a divided public. Joshua Runkles was arrested at State Farm Stadium, carrying weapons and presenting credentials that were fake, expired, or inactive. He claimed to be part of Turning Point USA's security team, but he wasn't authorized. Charges were filed, bond was set, and the legal process is only just beginning. But the bigger question lingers. What if this was only the tip of something larger? A warning, a test, or a real plot? And what does it tell us about how we guard democracy, authority, public spaces, and trust? If you saw someone cheating the system, claiming power that isn't theirs, and did nothing, what does that say about you? Don't be passive. If you value truth and safety, make your voice heard. Share this video so more people demand accountability. And if we stay silent when someone steps over the line, how long until the lines disappear altogether? We want to hear from you. What do you think was Joshua Runkles' true motive? Who, if anyone, do you believe sent him? If you found this breakdown helpful, subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts. Share it with someone who cares about justice and transparency.